ISU Extension Service Farm Progress Show 86, record 10-3-86, air 10-4-86.
Today would have been our busiest day. We'd have had, maybe 100 to 150,000 people here. Been crowded walking up and down the streets and avenues, a bunch of activity going on, but the only activity today is we've got some tractors loading out and being pulled out.
Of the mud.
Yeah, that's for sure. It's a mess out here. We just can't do anything about it, but we're just working with what we have.
The many people who planned and developed the 1986 Farm Progress Show didn't begin with disaster in mind. This is the first time the World's Fair of Agriculture has been rained out in 34 years. I talked recently with the editor of the Iowa-based Wallace's Farmer magazine, Monty Sesker.
In early 1950s, some prairie farmer editors, our Farm Progress publication in Illinois, were sitting around a coffee table, I guess, as I understand it, and visiting about what they could do for farmers and agribusiness to bring them together to look at machinery and new technology and this mechanization that was really coming in at that point. So they came on the idea of having an outside or an outdoors farm show where that the machines could actually work under typical field operations. Mm-hmm. So the show was kind of born at the coffee table. And in 1957, Prairie Farmer purchased Wallace's Farmer. Mm-hmm. And so in 1959, then, Iowa was added to the show list. And this year will represent the 34th show, the 9th one in Iowa. And from its meager beginnings, it wasn't really very meager. The first show, they expected an attendance of around 10,000. That was the most optimistic projection. And they totaled up over 30,000 people at that first show. So it really, and that was a one-day event. For the first 8 years, it was a one-day event, and then we moved into the 3-day affair. But it's blossomed into, I guess, one of the largest outdoor farm shows in the country, or is the largest outdoor farm show in the country, and one of the largest in the world. And
it's been copied. This show has really been a model for shows like this.
That's true. We're very proud of that fact, and I think one of the things that we can look at, and especially this year when our economy is in such a dire straits, that the Farm Progress Show is one kind of positive thing that we can look at. It's by its very nature. We're going to bring over 325 exhibitors to central Iowa, and just the fact that this new technology is still advancing, we're still progressing, and we still have farmers interested. And I think by the very nature, the Farm Progress Show is a positive thing for agriculture. There have been subtle changes, moving from the plowing, for example, and the field demonstrations was one of the things that farmers had really come to look at 10 years ago. And now we're moving more and more toward the conservation, tillage, and those types of subtle things have come into being, and the show changes in that respect. Yeah. But the basic format is pretty much the same as it has been for years.
Planning for this show began a long time ago. Much of the work has been done by show manager Mark Wilson.
We start on the show a year and a half in advance of when it's going to be in the area. We pick the show location, we work out on traffic routes, layout. We've already got the layout, the traffic routes, the seed plots, everything lined out for next year's show already. And then I actually move into the site in January and then stay there until the following January to make sure everything gets cleaned up and things like that.
Yeah. You were assistant manager last year so that you knew what to do.
Oh, I knew a little bit. It's a learning experience each year. It's very entertaining.
What goes into choosing the site?
Basically, we look for somewhere close to major interstates, easy accessibility for people to get in and out, close to a fairly large metropolitan town, so we have motels. We need around 3,000 to 5,000 motel rooms within a 50 to 60 mile radius. We look for fairly level land to hold our tent city here, so our building companies can have good areas. We also look for 1,300 acres in as close a proximity as possible, so we don't have, our field demonstrations a mile away. We also look for just the community, good communities, easy to work with, and most of all, host farmers that are very easy to get along with and work with us.
There's more than one farmer involved in this.
Yeah, there's 4 farmers this year, the Stalls, Tweets, Coreys, and Hollands.
Okay. That's an exciting time for them, too. They see this sort of thing happening. Now, you actually move into the community. You're single, so you moved alone into this community in January. When do you start working on this plot? This looks a lot different than it did a month ago.
Yeah, after we get the oats harvested off the exhibit field itself, and then we have our lot assignments up in our Lombard office, we decide where everyone's going to be located. And at that point, I can come out and actually start marking off the various lots themselves, putting in the, marking where the power poles are going. The power company can come in, start putting that in. The phone company can come in, start laying phones down. So it really starts taking shape right after the first part of August. That's when we can really come out and start working on the exhibit field itself.
You build a city.
Yeah, that's basically what we do. We put in a water line, telephones, electricity, everything a normal city has, we have out here on our little tent city, we call it.
As the Farm Progress Show takes shape, some of the most important people involved are members of the host families. Don Wishart talked recently with farmer Jack Holland.
What's the arrangement as far as the planting and harvesting of crops and what happens to the grain? Do you do that, or do they sort of take over your farm for a year, or how does that work?
They do not take over the ground. That really surprised me, Don. They came in here. I expected to have to change my planting, my rotations. They work their entire show around us in that I planted like I normally would. I'll harvest. Well, in this case, they will harvest, weather permitting, all the grain on about 300 acres for me. And the grain, of course, it's mine. I have to find a place for it. That's the only thing that's different. I have to find a place in a hurry because they'll have several machines running where I'm just used to having one run. So with that in mind, in the evenings we'll be rather busy trying to find a place to put the grain.
What's going to happen to you after this is all over?
I'm afraid we're going to have one big letdown. I love the excitement. They had their office parked here on my farm up until day before yesterday. Been like Grand Central Station around here, and it's been the best year of my life. I've enjoyed every minute of it.
One of the most popular exhibits at each Farm Progress Show is put on by the host state's land-grant university. Part of Iowa State's program was ready in the field next to the ISU tent. I talked with ISU Extension agronomists Garen Benson and Steve Barnhart a few days before the show's planned debut. 1930 corn. Where did you get old seed corn?
Dr. Bill Russell of our corn breeding staff, of course, has this kind of material they use for testing, and so we have here a complete display from the early open pollinated materials right up to modern day hybrids.
What's the point? What are you trying to show?
Partially to illustrate the changes. People can look here and see the differences in standability. Dr. Russell has had extensive testing, in fact 2 years at 4 locations, and so we will have yield data on this showing exactly what under modern conditions the yield differences are between corn that was grown in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so we'll have not only for the real corn to look at, but the data for them to see.
Yeah, give me a little bit of the data. Without a sheet in front of you, it's hard, but we changed a great deal.
Yes, we have, and it's interesting. As we went from the open pollinateds to the early hybrids, yields increased about 30%. But standability, as they will see here, actually was sacrificed. You had more weight on the plant, and so it lodged somewhat more. Then as we went into the 40s and 50s, the yields actually decreased, but the standability was so much better that the mechanically harvested yield was higher. So they were about 25% increase over open pollinated. As we got to the 60s, the yield increases were about 40% over open pollinated, and by the time we're to 80s, we're about 65% greater yield in the open pollinated, plus fire, superior standability.
Yeah, we've got some really strange things out here in the back, some corn that looks 8, 9, 10 feet tall.
Yes, and beyond the regular corn, we've got what we call our exotics, and we've got, for example, some Ito, which is a Mexican corn that's about twice as tall as something else, and you say, why have that? Well, breeders look to this sort of thing as a source of germplasm. It may have resistance to a disease, a stock problem, so they breed that into regular materials and partially to pick up resistance, but also for this thing of diversity. They're always looking for new sources of germplasm, so we bring new diversity into our corn lines.
At the Farm Progress Show with Steve Barnhart, Extension agronomist for Iowa State, looking at, well, there must be close to 8 or 9, 10 forages in here, maybe more.
Yes, Roger. It's in an area that's called Future Crops for Iowa, and some of the producers that will come by here will laugh because these are something that have been grown for many, many years. I guess the reason we put these here at the Farm Progress Show are to show where some of our existing crops are also alternatives for what has become more traditional row crop farmers. A number of these forage crops are used regularly as cover crops on diverted acres or set-aside acres. The clovers and alfalfas and some of the other legumes are used exclusively for cover and to provide some additional fertilizer value to the soil when it is plowed down or tilled in. Some of the other forage crops have alternative value as a commercial hay crop. Some producers have not been making hay for a number of years, but the hay market is now being established in the state. So there are some opportunities for hay production. In addition, there is still an opportunity for some producers who are willing to work at it to grow some of our forage grasses and legumes for seed production as an alternative cash crop. So there are a number of things that we can look at. A few of the new items, relatively new in terms of use in Iowa, are some of the grazing opportunities that some of our sheep producers and cattle producers have found by using some of the turnips and those kinds of turnip-related crops for late summer grazing when many of our grass pastures are dormant in midsummer and late summer.
Steve, you said to show folks where we are with these crops, as in where we've come with breeding. We have here some good growing crops.
Yes, Roger. Development of forage crops has been primarily for increasing yield, but to a greater extent trying to identify varieties and materials that are resistant to the kinds of diseases that are common in the state of Iowa. So most of our improved varieties of forage crops can withstand a lot of our problem diseases, and by that same nature are quite productive under Iowa growing conditions now.
Garen, this looks like a garden out here, a garden of grains and forages and such. What's the idea behind these plots?
The idea here is to really display a piece, at least, of the kind of diversity of crops that we're looking at in Iowa. Some of these crops have been popular for many years, red clover, the alfalfas, this sort of thing, small grains. Then we have some that many people will have never seen before, lupin, faba bean, possibly cranberry, rapeseed, turnips for a forage. So we have the full range from familiar to unfamiliar plants here.
And different uses for many of these things. For instance, cranberry, rapeseed, that's an oil, those are oil crops.
That's right. This is a demonstration, but many of these crops are being looked at from a research point of view for that very reason. Unfortunately, many of our crops just compete with one another, and so if you can find something like cranberry that has industrial oil use, or some of the rape can be used in that method, this is all the better. However, I think we're mainly here just trying to show people what they look like. If they'll come by, why someone will visit with them about these crops, what their potential are. We don't say that they should or should not grow this or that, but mainly to see where we're at and go from there.
Jack Green, manager of the Show and Exhibit Division of John Deere, spends more than a week at the show site, helping put together one of the largest demonstrations. I saw a big rock concert a couple of weeks ago and saw them set up for it. That's what this reminds me of. You have quite a crew. Tell me about the size of your crew.
Oh, it's difficult to give you an accurate figure. I'd say right now we have about 25 or 30 people working on this setup.
How long does it take? How long does it take to set up? I know the Husker show was just a week or so ago.
It'll take us about 14 days to get everything in place for the Farm Progress Show.
Yeah, they don't do one every weekend, fortunately.
Fortunately, we couldn't do that.
Yeah. Do the same group of folks all work on each show, or do you hire local people?
It's a mixture. We have really two crews. We started one crew out in Grand Island, Nebraska for Husker Harvest Days, and that crew tore that show down. Now they're preparing to go to Georgia, so they'll leapfrog us and begin setup, I believe, next Monday down there in Georgia. Then we'll tear this show down, and part of what we pack here we'll ship down to Georgia.
How do you decide what to bring to the three, the Harvest Husker and the one in the south? How do you decide what equipment to bring in, how it looks, that sort of thing?
It's determined by the crop area. Obviously, you get out to Husker Harvest Days, we're starting to get out near wheat country, so there'll be some equipment there that's appropriate for that type of cropping. You get to the Corn Belt or the center of the Corn Belt, this crop here determines that mixture of product. We get down to Georgia, of course, they're growing an entirely different mixture of product for market, so we'll bring slightly different equipment there.
Do you try to introduce new equipment at these types of shows? Is this a good place to do that?
Absolutely. Historically, the farm shows have been the place that manufacturers introduced equipment. However, without getting into a discussion of the farm economy right now, we're not announcing as many machines as we might have been a few years ago.
Yeah. Jack, is this fun for you?
You bet.
I'll bet it is.
It really is. You couldn't do this work if you didn't get some enjoyment out of it.
Yeah. Except for the rain.
Except for the rain. Yeah.
This year, for Jack Green and crew and thousands of others, the rains kept coming, and too soon, it was time to tear down. Jack, have you ever had to mud one out before?
Not quite this bad.
Yeah. How many years have you been at it that you haven't had this kind of situation?
I've been doing farm shows since 1971, whatever number of years that might be.
Uh-huh. That's a long time without this kind of a problem. I guess you had to hit one like this once in a while.
Well, Mother Nature has been good to us up to this point. We've been delayed a couple of times, but this is the first time that we ever had to scrub one.
Yeah. Now, we talked to you before about this setup. This goes on to another show.
We're going to pack this one up this afternoon, and it goes on a trailer, and it'll be in Moultrie, Georgia, probably by they'll unload it this coming Monday.
With hoses at the ready, I suppose.
That's right. You know, they'll have to do some cleaning, and they know about it down there already.
Yeah. For you folks, it's even though you do a number of shows a year, this has to be a disappointment.
Oh, it is a disappointment, and you're mostly disappointed because of the good people, the dealer people, the company people, the trades that have cooperated with us, that have worked hard, long hours, and that's all down the drain now. And that's what you really feel bad about, because there are people who work with cold hands and wetbacks for days on end with not a whole lot of praise, and now they don't get to see their show.
Yeah, and it has to be, you have to feel for the farmers that have this land, for the people in the food tents, the people that don't get to come and see this.
Well, the community has been behind this, and I know that there are some community people that are really disappointed and are going to take their losses on this, and for that we feel sorry too.
Of all of the hundreds of folks involved in this year's Farm Progress Show, perhaps no one is more disappointed at the cancellation than show manager Mark Wilson.
Yeah, it's real disappointing. I feel for the host farmers and all the other people that have put a lot of effort into this also. I mean, the host farmers have been looking for this for 2 years, and now it's not going to be, and they don't know what the chances of ever having the show back and things like that. So it's quite a disappointment for them. And companies have put a lot of money into this. Food tent people, pop people, all had high expectations. But it's a deal with an outdoor show. You just got to take your risks and go with that.
You've been around the show circuit for a couple of years now. Let's talk about costs, if we may. I don't know about dollar figures, but to the big people, Deere, Ford, Pioneer, and so on, this is just part of the game, I guess.
Yeah, they realized it last night. Talked with a lot of the exhibitors, and everyone was very understanding. They knew we couldn't have a show and this kind of stuff. They accept the risk when they sign the contract to be in the show, that there's a chance that it may be rained out. But one show out of 34 is not bad.
To the smaller manufacturer, this perhaps is a bigger disappointment, if that's possible, because they really count on this, don't they?
Yeah, a lot of them, don't do much other advertising or don't go to any other shows, and this is their main emphasis of where they want to get to people and have people see their product. And so it's, it hurts them, but I guess it's tricks of the trade, I guess. I don't know.
Let's look at it from one other standpoint. You come from a farm, don't you?
Yes, farming in Illinois.
Farmers can't do much about the weather either.
That's for sure. It just goes to prove the way the economy has been. It's been real sluggish, and it's awful sluggish out here on the field.
Yeah. What happens to you now? Are you sticking with Farm Progress, and will you be part of the show next year?
Yeah, I couldn't quit on a note like this. I've got to come back and see what we can do next year and see how well that runs, and who knows, maybe I'll go on to Indiana also.
This site is here, the poles are up and so on. Will this be completely stripped off, or is there a chance that might leave things set up for a couple of years from now?
It's hard telling. We've already got things set up for next year, but I don't know. We'd have to check into everything, talk with all kinds of people, but right now the plans are to tear down.